Hi everyone! In today's video, I will be showing you how I painted this Galah or Pink and Grey Cockatoo using watercolor paints. Now for the initial sketch, I'm using a water-soluble graphite pencil. The brand I'm using is the Faber-Castell Aquarelle HB, and this allows me to not have harsh graphite lines when I start going over with the watercolor paint. Remember, watercolor paint is quite translucent and transparent, so it's going to have the lines are, if you have very solid graphite lines drawn underneath with normal graphite pencil, it can show up, especially if the pencil is laid down very dark, or you press down very hard, it can show up through the watercolor paints and you're going to see those lines. So in this case, I didn't want those lines to show, so I prefer to use the water soluble graphite pencil. I use that also when I'm using my gouache or when I'm using acrylic paints as well as oil paints as well. So you can see now I'm starting off with a very light layer of pinks. I'm starting off lighter to dark areas. I just started layering in where the feathers are going to be, whether more or less the direction of the feathers, the shadows of the feathers. I'm going to come through and define those later a bit more, but I'm just getting the areas of the darker, where the darker pink is going to go, where the grays are going to go, where the shadow areas are, keeping the areas that are lighter quite light, so we don't want them to get too dark. Over there you saw I didn't like the way the bead came out, so I just added a little bit of more water and then I lifted it up with the dry brush again. You can also lift it up with a paper towel and then wait for it to dry and then correct the mistake or correct it to the way you wanted it to be. So with this particular reference photo, I saw that the top of the head of the feathers in the front of the head, top of the head were very light. They were almost white. But if I painted them that kind of color, it was not going to come through very well or show very well because the paper is white. So to avoid that, what I did is I just used a very light pink, just so that you can see the difference between the background, which is the white paper, and the actual bird and the feathers of the bird. I am going to come through with some shadows and define those feathers as well. So you can see now I'm going through and I'm paying close attention to the reference photo, seeing the direction of the feathers, seeing defining them more and seeing which areas need to have more color and more darker pinks and shadow areas. Remember, when you're painting feathers, you need to pay close attention to the areas where the feathers overlap, because that's where you can add your shadow areas and that's where you need to put in the shadows. Because if you paint in the shadows and you pay close attention to where the shadows are, that's what will make your painting or drawing look more realistic and it'll look more three-dimensional. So you can see now I'm starting to go through with darker pinks. I keep darkening the pink. With watercolor, it's better to start lighter to dark, work from light to dark, then work from dark to light, because it'll be difficult for you to add a lighter color over a darker color with watercolors. With gouache, you may be able to add lighter colors over the darker colors because it's a bit more opaque, but with watercolors, start off light and then move to the darker colors. So now I'm just defining those shadow areas on the feathers on this bird's head, because that I just want to define it and give it the shape and give it the structure of the feathers and show the feathers. Otherwise you're not going to be able to tell what's going on. It'll just look like a blurry color on the top of the head and you will not see any actual feathers. So we need to define that to make it look more realistic. Now I'm just going in and working on the eye, adding some of the details there. Okay, now I'm coming through with some of the grays and just putting in some of the shadow areas around the beak. I'm not going in with black because that's going to be too dark and it's not going to look realistic. Since this bird does have grays in it, the best idea would to use a very light diluted gray just to get those shadow areas in. We don't want it too dark, but we also don't want it too light. We want it to show. So try to use a gray, or you could mix the gray with some darker pinks just to get that dark color in there for the shadow areas of the feathers. So when you look at your reference photo, you'll see the dark areas, and you know those darker areas is where the shadows are falling, and you can see where the feathers are overlapping, and then obviously underneath you would bring all those shadows onto the painting so that you can make the feathers look more realistic. So I'm just coming through and defining those feathers on the head, and I'm going to come through with just a slight glaze just to get the colors, to blend everything through and let all the colors, the feathers blend in and get them all colored, so the feathers show that where the feathers are and where the shadow areas are. So now I'm just adding some pink to better define the feathers. And I'm also adding some shadows just to make it look more three-dimensional. So I guess that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and share. If you have any questions, comment below, and don't forget to subscribe. Till the next one, bye.